The next question is, what is the best way to handle video levels in Baselight? So about this topic, when I read the question coming in, I thought, okay, let's take a deep dive and accept the challenge and try to answer it in a comprehensive way, the full and legal topic regarding Baselight. So I prepared a few slides here for that. So first I want to start and get all the namings and definitions right, because there are different namings and wordings out there used, and I just want to make that straight. So we're dealing with three different image states. One is full range, one is semi-full range. I will go into the details of this in a moment. And there is a legal range. Also, by the way, all the code values that I'm mentioning and talking about are all meant in 10 bits. So if you are thinking in 8-bit, then you need to divide by 4. And if you need 12-bit values, multiply it by 4. So full range levels are also called data levels or computer levels, and they mean black is at 0, white is at 1023. Semi-full range is the version that is used on the SDI signal, where the code values below 4 and above 1019 are used for syncing and ancillary data. And legal range is also called video levels, limited range, sometimes also called SEMT range. This signal also has a range of 0 to 1023, but reference black is at 64 and reference white is at 940. And the code values below and above are reserved for the super blacks and the super whites. And this, for example, makes sense for chroma subsampled signals like 422, where you might get some chroma overshoots or some overshoots, especially in the reconstruction of the signal. Okay, but I guess most of you know what full and legal levels are. I just wanted to do a quick recap and get the naming right that I'm going to use. Then we have different conversions between these levels, and these are the ones that are available in Baselight, and I'm going to quickly explain what they are doing. No scale is the easiest one. It just does nothing. So it keeps 0 at 0 and 1023 at 1023, and everything else in between remains as it is. Then there's a legal to full scale. So this converts from legal range to full range. So this maps a 64 to 0, 940 to 1023 and stretches everything in between accordingly. If there are values in the super blacks or in the super whites in Baselight, because we are a floating point software, we will still map these values going to full scale, and then they will live below 0 and above 1023, but in a floating point image, that is not an issue. Then we have the opposite, which is the full to legal scale that converts from full range to legal range, does it the opposite way, scales the image to these values. And we have two different versions of the full to legal scale, the normal one, and we have the full to legal scale unclipped. And the difference is that in the normal full to legal scale, after the scaling, we apply a hard clip at 64 and 940. So there will be nothing in the super blacks and in the super whites. Whereas in the full to legal scale unclipped, we will not do that hard clipping. The reason this might be useful is what I just mentioned. We are a floating point software, and so it's totally reasonable that there might be some image values here living below 0 or above 1023. And in this case, they will not be clipped. One special side note for the experts is that if you use a mastering color space, that this one will also clip to 0 to 1 before the full to legal scale. So if you have a mastering color space active, then usually even the unclipped version will produce clipped output. But if you're rendering a scene referred version of your image, for example, to exchange with visual effects, then the rendering with the unclipped would definitely make sense. Then there is another mode which is called clip to legal, which is basically just chopping off the blacks and the whites while we convert from full range to legal range. So here we're really losing definition in the shadows and in the highlights, but the contrast in between will not change. will not change. But this one is flagged as legacy by us, and you should not use it anymore. It's just still in the software available to maintain existing workflows and setups that you're using. And the same is true for the soft clip to legal, which I did not put here on the top of the slide. So now let's get a few foundations right when we think about Baselight and full and legal range. The color management system inside Baselight is called TrueLight Color Spaces. And TrueLight Color Spaces only works with full range images. So it always expects full range images. And so that's a really important point. This is true since Baselight 5.0. Before Baselight 5.0, there were also some color spaces available as a legal version. But when we had a deep discussion about it, we decided that it's the better solution how we're doing it now since Baselight 5.0. And so we instantly can go to the third point here on that slide. Please don't use legal range color spaces anymore. Please manage this with the legal full scaling options that you have available in the software and which I am about to show in a moment. And the second point here is all the operators in the Baselight timeline expect full range images. So that means the big takeaway from this slide here should be the Baselight timeline is always full range. Okay, so how do you manage the legal and full scaling for the input? Image sources can be either legal range or full range. There's only these two options. If the input image is legal range, Baselight applies a legal to full scale on input. And in the sequence operator or in the input strip, there's that toggle here, legal to full scale, that you can check or uncheck. And Baselight tries to always set this right for the footage, and I would say it does it in most cases. And if you have a case where a Baselight is clearly wrong about this, then please let us know. But there can always be cases with transcoded footage or where something went wrong or wrong metadata in the files, then please adjust this accordingly. And also don't be scared with activating legal to full scale, because as I said, it will maintain the information in the super whites and in the super blacks. If the input data is full range, no level scaling is required. That's easy. And as I just said, the image data in the super blacks and super whites is not clipped. And for the experts, this is the order of operations. So here you can see the optional legal to full scale is happening before the TrueLight color spaces conversion, then from the input color space to the stack color space, because TrueLight color spaces always expects full range images. Now for the output, there we have two possibilities, because we have an SDI output that goes to our grading display, and we have a render output, and we need to manage both of them and can adjust also both of them. So if the output data is required to be legal range, a full to legal scaling is applied. And for the SDI output, so for the grading display, you have these options here, full to legal scale and no scale, no clip as the second option. The other ones are just 444 and 422. And as mentioned before, here below you have the legacy modes, which you shouldn't use anymore. And for the rendering, on the render page, you have the video LUT option, and that is the full legal scaling option for the renders. And they're adjusted also accordingly with either a full to legal scale or with a no scale. If the output data is required to be full range, no level scaling is required. And if the output data is required to be SMPTE full range, that is only valid for the SDI out. A full to SMPTE full scaling is applied. And we will now have a short look at this special case, full range versus SMPTE full range. And please don't mix SMPTE full range with SMPTE range, because SMPTE range is often referred to as for legal range, but SMPTE full range means the range from 4 to 1019. So this is a special case of full range that is only present in SDI signals. So there the CV code values 0 to 3 and 1020 to 1023 are reserved for ancillary data. And if you would send a true full range on an SDI output, then the image information in these code values would be clipped. And so you can go into the Baselight setups. So there you will find this menu here, and there you can change the full range to 70 full range. If you're outputting legal range, you don't need to deal with that. So that's only for the case if you're outputting full range over SDI. And here that graph here is actually in the right scale. So it's really a minimal difference. It's less than 1%. In extreme cases, it can be important. Now, a few things to consider, and I want to clear out a few misconceptions that I'm sometimes hearing among people. And I will go through them one by one. So the first one I already mentioned, Baselight detects the correct input levels automatically for most files. And if you have a case where we're clearly wrong, then yeah, please write to Baselight support, or you can email me. Then the output scaling for SDI or rendering is not related in any way to the input scaling or vice versa. So just because you use legal to full on the input, that doesn't have any effect on the rendering or on the output. So, and also if you change it on the output, it has no effect on the input, or should not have an effect. The SDI output scaling only depends on what the display expects at the input. And also the SDI output scaling is in no way dependent on the render output scaling or vice versa. So just because you change your scaling for the SDI to full to legal, that does not mean you need to change your render settings to full to legal. So these are also completely independent. And the render output scaling only depends on what the file type and the delivery specifications dictate. And to make this, because this all sounds now very theoretical, and also thanks for staying with me on this a little bit maybe dry topic, I made a little bit more a big slide trying to give a rough guideline for the real world. And so please don't sue me if you have a case where where one of this is not true, because there are always exceptions, but this is what I would say is the broad standard in the industry. So on the left side here, we have all the different input types. On the top, the typical legal range ones. On the bottom, the typical full range ones. On the right, we have rendering. On the top, legal range, bottom, full range. And here on the top, we have the different displays with their typical scaling settings. One common misconception that I heard quite often is that ProRes 4x4 is full range, and that's not true. So all ProRes files should be legal range. DNX HD can be full and legal range, but in most cases I saw it's legal range, and H.264 is mostly legal range. And here you see these ones. By the way, these settings here are not saying how the codecs are working internally. So there might be codecs that internally work with a legal range, but this is the setting that you use, that you will use in Baselight when loading them in or rendering them out. For the displays, a typical 422 display would be, we would drive with a full to legal scale, and the display would be set to, in the menu, to 70 or limited, it's often called in the menus. A 444 display, there's really no clear preference. I see them being used with no scale or full to legal scale. But for projectors, DCI projectors, most people drive them with no scale, so with full range, and also the projector expects full range. And here you can see the typical renders, and I just added here IMF and DCP also that are typically full range. And the last thing I want to talk about in this topic is how to verify your SDI display so that you have the correct settings working on it. And a short disclaimer in the beginning, this is not a full display calibration, just the foundation. And if you use converter boxes or LUT boxes in the display chain, this might make troubleshooting a little bit more difficult, but I hope you get the general idea how that can work. And so the idea is you create a new scene with the video scene template in Baselight. You insert the color bars and choose the gray bars pattern. If you see 11 steps, which is what you will see today, then apply a film grade with these settings. And we also recently changed the gray bars pattern so that it will have 17 steps, then you don't need to do that step. So if you watch this as a video in the future and you will have 17 steps, then just leave it like it is. Then you will see that the first step will be 0, and the second one 64 code value, and also these values here for in the highlights. Then toggle the SDI out in Baselight between no scale clip and full to legal. And then choose the setting where both steps are visible. So where you can see a difference in the blacks and in the highlights. And if the steps are visible in both settings, then choose no scale clip, because then your display is basically expecting full range inputs. And I tried to explain all 4 possible cases in this scenario on this slide. So here on the left, we have the Baselight output setting, and this is what the display expects. And in typical displays, the legal range is typically called limited. So if we're outputting no scale from Baselight, basically full range, and the display expects legal range, then it will look like this. So this will be a mismatch because the steps are not visible here. That's wrong. If we output full to legal, but the display expects full range, then the blacks will be lifted and the whites will be a bit darker. That's a tricky one to catch, but or more tricky. But if you follow the procedure, it should be possible. And if no scale clip is output from Baselight and display expects full range, it will look like this, which is the right way, and the same for full to legal and legal range. By the way, these 2 options will give the same result on the display. So outputting full to legal or full range is not affecting the look of the image. It's just a technical scaling operation.
Okay. There's one question you might, because you could go a few slides back. It was rendering quick times ProRes. Should we use now full to legal or full to legal unscaled? So in which situation should you choose which option?
That's a good question. So if you're working with a DRT family like TrueLight Cam or ACES, then I would recommend using full to legal scale unclipped for everything, because then you typically have the mastering color space set to automatic from DRT, and then the mastering color space will always be a sensible one for every render. And so then it will automatically clip to legal range for all display referred renderings, which is typically what you want because these are final deliveries, but it will not clip for scene referred deliveries because these are intermediate renders that go to visual effects or into an archive. So generally, I would say use a mastering color space and use full to legal scale unclipped. And if you don't use a mastering color space, which is what I definitely not recommend, then for final deliveries, you might need to choose full to legal scale to ensure that there's nothing in the super blacks and super whites. Okay, I will switch over to Daniele, I guess, as the next presenter.